Who we're dealing with today happens to be an iconic horror movie villain, one who has all sorts of bizarrely dreadful powers at his disposal so as to exploit the youngest and most vulnerable residents of the cursed town of Derry. Well, we're talking about It, who primarily appears in the form of Pennywise the Dancing Clown every 27 years to continue preying upon children before going back to hibernation. Truth be told, it works as a mystery to his victims, given his appallingly terrifying powers, and dare we disregard that unrelenting nature? And in today's video, we'll be exploring the entire lore of it. So you think you know everything about this ancient, trans-dimensional, malevolent entity? Let's find out, shall we? But before we go into our explanation, we do have one very small request. If you enjoy our content, then please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Now, let's begin. The origin story of Pennywise explained. Did you really think we'd head straight to the movies without even making the slightest bit of an effort to talk about the origins of Pennywise the Dancing Clown? Well, that's certainly not happening here. And with that being said, we'll now be delving into the complex mythology that is there behind this supernatural monster. Where does this predatory monster come from? First things first. In spite of its highly disturbing appearance, he is not a clown. We're looking at an ancient evil being, one that's almost as old as the universe. Anyone who's well-versed in Stephen King's 1986 horror novel will recall that the entity's actual name happens to be Robert Bob Gray. Mind you, Bob Gray isn't exactly human despite the uncannily regular name. He just happens to share the same origin as it. Now, to those of you wondering why did the films drop out this part, let's be honest here. Like it or not, the origins of Pennywise in King's novel were not only ambiguous, but also exceedingly complex. King's Pennywise was a cosmic horror entity, one that naturally came with a lot of explanation, especially in terms of its history and backstory. While we will be delving into the details of the movies later, there's no denying that the films did keep a few of the core aspects intact. For instance, Pennywise did belong to this interdimensional realm known as the Deadlights. Anyway, it's fitting to state that it hails from an undiscovered dimension that contains the entirety of existence. While this boundless expanse in Pennywise's origin story is called the Macroverse, at some unspecified point in time, it left Deadlights only to travel across the Macroverse and make his way to Earth. Of course, this was millions of years ago. The place it arrived on Earth would, in due course, become North America, and eons later, the town of Derry would ultimately be built there in the year 1715. It slumbered beneath the earth for millions of years, and after he woke up from his slumber, he started a feeding cycle, devouring on the fears of people and often taking the shape of whatever his prey feared the most. The cycle would last for a year, after which it would resume hibernation only to resurface after a period of 27 years and continue doing the same. Its penchant for preying on the children. Technically speaking, it does not exactly eat kids. What it does is feed on their worst fears, which thereby makes the process deadly. It's true that it does have a preference for children, but that's simply because the fears of children are a lot easier to interpret and manifest into some kind of physical form than the fears of adults. Also, we'd like to add some interesting trivia here. Stephen King was hell-bent for it to take the form of Pennywise the Dancing Clown because he firmly believed that clowns are capable of scaring the shit out of children more than anything else in the world. Well, looking back at the TV series and the movies, he sure was right. That being said, it also possesses the power to manipulate adults, something that usually depends on his mood. It has deftly been manipulating the very minds of the Derry residents for a long time, so much so that in spite of a large chunk of children going missing, the adults are only seen posting new missing photos over the old pictures and carrying on as if nothing ever went wrong. Furthermore, it has been a part of dread and death in Derry for centuries, which was established when the character of Ben Hanscom from the 2017 movie researched the town's history. In case you didn't know this, it was actually responsible for the explosion at the Kirchner Ironworks that killed a total of 108 people, out of which 88 were children. In addition to this, it can also be awakened by certain acts of violence, as seen in King's novel, which begins with a boy named Dorsey Corcoran beaten to death by his stepfather in the year 1957. So while there's no denying that the primary goal of It is to devour children, we can't disregard the fact that he absolutely enjoys scaring the living daylights out of his prey before feasting on them. What is the true form of It? While It has taken several forms over the course of the two-part psychological drama miniseries followed by Andy Muschietti's supernatural horror flicks, have you ever wondered what the real form of It is? If we take a look at Pennywise, the creepy-looking clown is just the preferred physical form of It. Well, it's fitting to state that It is basically a shapeshifter who has the power to take the form of whatever his victims fear the most. Remember how in the 2017 movie, It took the form of a deceased and rotting leper to chase Jack Dylan Grazer's Eddie, primarily because he knew Eddie's worst fear was getting infected? You'll be surprised to learn that It has taken on many different forms in King's novel, which are not just restricted to a giant spider. A horde of other famous monsters made an appearance in the novel, and they were mostly removed from the movie because the producers of It didn't have cinematic rights to them. We're talking about It taking the form of Dracula, the sharks from Jaws, and even Rodan from the Godzilla films. Anyway, coming back to the movies, if you can recall It Chapter 2, you'll remember Bill Hader's Richie had also managed to catch a glimpse of It's true form when the latter made him catatonic. When Richie gets hit by the Deadlights in the sequel, it appears as a string of glowing lights in the midst of countless walls of fiery orange flesh and needle-sharp teeth. This brief experience is more than enough to cause Richie's eyes to roll back into his head, literally, and it almost felt like he was about to die. If you ask us, the film adaptation showcased this part in a fantastic manner, keeping in mind that King's It is a cosmic entity with godlike powers at the end of the day. Superpowers of It. We're dealing with an ancient supernatural evil that obviously possesses a multitude of superpowers. Let's begin with the shapeshifting ability, which gives It the power to transform into any form that he wants to, and he usually becomes whatever someone fears the most. Next comes casting illusions, which he mainly does to instill fear. The illusions are not only physical, but they can also last for as long as It wants them to. There's also a high probability that some of the illusions cast by It are hallucinations, which It can plant in the very minds of his victims telepathically. Then comes It's ability to manipulate how people tend to see reality. And if you ask us, we firmly believe that this is how It got away with years and years of violence. We'd like to state a small example here to make you understand things better. In the 2017 movie, when It attacks Beverly in the bathroom, her abusive father doesn't see that the entire bathroom is covered in blood. This clearly means that It can bend reality, exploiting the very fears of his victims, and that he's also very selective about who he wants to see and what he wants them to see. Moving on, It also possesses the power of invisibility. He can appear to the ones that he wishes to and simultaneously stay invisible to the rest. This clearly means that only those who are aware of It's existence can see him. Add to this the power of telekinesis, It can make living as well as inanimate objects fall or float around. Furthermore, It can also steal the souls of his victims and entrap them within the Deadlights. What's more is It's ability to control weather, teleport to any location within Derry, and regenerate himself. Of course, the regeneration power stops working in his favor if his attackers are not afraid of him anymore. In the 2017 film, the amount of physical damage subjected to him by the combined forces of the losers towards the end of the movie made him retreat deeper into the sewers and go back into hibernation for 27 years. It, Eater of Worlds. While it simply relishes feasting on the fear of humanity, his true goal is much larger than devouring a bunch of people every 27 years. It is believed to have quite an extent that its true desire is to leave a planet absolutely barren by consuming all life in it. Of course, this isn't explored in the movies, but it was, in all probability, consuming entire worlds before arriving on Earth. While its plan of destroying all of Earth's life was thwarted, there is an implication that he has feasted on worlds before. It TV miniseries 1990. As promised earlier, we'll be exploring the appearance of It in detail while simultaneously delving deeper into the narrative of Tommy Lee Wallace's two-part psychological horror drama miniseries. During the spring of 1960 in Derry, Georgie Denbrough is seen enjoying a rainy afternoon playing with a paper boat that his elder brother made for him when his sailboat suddenly gets swept into a storm drain. Of course, Georgie is upset at losing the boat and is about to leave when he sees Pennywise the Dancing Clown inside the drain. With Pennywise being overtly friendly and holding out the sailboat to Georgie, the latter attempts to reach for it, only for the clown to rip his arm off and, in turn, cause his death. After a few months, Georgie's stuttering older brother Bill and his asthmatic friend Eddie Kaspbrak are seen becoming friends with Ben Haskam, the fat new kid in the neighborhood. The boys eventually befriend Beverly Marsh, who lives with her abusive father, after which Beverly and Ben are introduced to Bill and Eddie's other friends, Richie Todger and Stan Uris. With the group spending more time together, Ben starts having feelings for Beverly and ends up sending her a poem without letting her know that he had written it for her. However, Beverly assumes that the poem is from Bill and develops feelings for him instead. Ben witnesses all of this, much to his dismay, but says nothing to Beverly. It's also around the same time that the group starts to get bullied by a gang led by the sociopath Henry Bowers. And as fate would have it, the worst of things were further in store for them. Each of them ends up having nightmarish encounters with Pennywise. Bill finds a picture of Georgie winking at him, after which the photo album has blood seeping from it. Pennywise takes the form of Ben's dead father and appears to him initially, only to transform into his clown version and horrify Ben. Beverly hears voices coming out of her bathroom sink, only to have blood burst out of everywhere from the sink, and when her father comes to check up on her, he isn't able to see any of the blood. Eddie encounters Pennywise while taking a shower at the school gym and ends up triggering a bad asthma attack. Richie, on the other hand, gets attacked by a werewolf in a cellar, and no points for guessing that it was Pennywise, who had deliberately taken up that form to scare him out of his wits. Now, to those of you wondering what about Stan, he's the last one to encounter Pennywise. Right after an African-American new kid in town, Mike Hanlon, joins his circle of friends. Calling themselves the Losers Club, the group takes a look at Mike's old photo album and realizes that Pennywise has been in Derry for a very long time. They decide to address Pennywise as It, and further learn that it is no human, but an ancient predatory monster, one who awakens every 30 years, primarily to hunt and feed. As it dawns upon Bill that Georgie was killed by none other than It, he asks the group to help him out and leads the losers into the town's sewers, hoping to end the creature. Stan gets separated from the group and is attacked by Henry and his friends, Vic Crass and Belch Huggins. While Vic is killed by It in the form of Deadlights, Belch is grabbed, bent, and pulled inside a pipe, and possibly consumed by It later. Of course, It comes back for Henry, but somehow it doesn't take him. Henry is left traumatized to such an extent that his entire hair turns white from shock. Stan finds his way back to the losers, but gets grabbed by It. It tells the group that he intentionally likes to frighten the children before killing them because they taste a lot better when they're shit scared. This has the losers taking advantage of It's power to access their imaginations and then use it against It. Eddie visualizes that his inhaler is full of battery acid, which in turn melts half of It's face. Following this, Beverly slingshots her silver earrings at It, and this seems to break its head wide open. The losers attempt to grab it and stop him from escaping down a drain, but It eventually escapes through the dark hole. As the wounded It is heard growling in agony, the losers are left wondering if they've actually managed to kill It. While the group leaves the sewers, they make a pact to come back to Derry as adults should It ever return. As for Henry, he goes mad and confesses to the deaths of all those killed by It and is confined to a mental asylum. 30 years later, Mike happens to be the only one from the group to have never left Derry. While he's seen working as the town librarian, It resurfaces and begins the killing cycle, prompting Mike to get back in touch with his old friends and fulfill their promise. All of the losers have gone on to have seemingly successful careers. Bill is a best-selling horror writer, Ben is an architect, Richie is a late-night talk show host, Eddie runs a limousine service, Beverly's a fashion designer, and Stan is a married real estate broker. All of the losers except for Stan make their way back to Derry, and It starts to taunt and torment each of them. As the losers reunite, they're disheartened to learn that Stan has committed suicide, as he could just not bear the thought of returning to Derry to fight It. In the meantime, Henry flees from the asylum with its help and goes after the losers to kill them. Unaware of the situation, Bill's wife Audra travels to Derry around the same time, only to get captured by it and rendered catatonic in the process. Mike happens to be Henry's first target, and while he's able to injure Mike seriously, Henry ends up fatally stabbing himself with his own switchblade when Eddie and Ben rush in to help Mike. Mike is hospitalized right on time, and he gives Bill the silver earrings that he was able to retrieve from the sewers a few years ago. The remaining losers ultimately decide to kill it once and for all and return to the sewers to confront the monster. With the 5 taking the same route through the pipes as they'd done 30 years before, they reach a large subterranean cave. While Bill is horrified to find Audra there, engulfed in spiderwebs, he and the rest also discover its real form. A gigantic spider monster with razor-sharp teeth. Beverly shoots the silver earrings, but they have no effect on the spider. Instead, it manages to hypnotize Ben, Richie, and Bill with the deadlights emerging from its underside. This has Eddie also trying to inflict the same wound he did on it as a child, but gets grabbed and mortally wounded by it in the process. When Beverly manages to shoot the spider in the chest, it collapses, and she's able to free her hands. However, Eddie succumbs to his injuries and dies, surrounded by his friends. As the wounded spider crawls away deeper into the cave, the others go after it, determined to finish it. When they finally manage to corner it, they rip out the heart, killing it once and for all. The group makes their way out of the sewers, carrying along with them Eddie's body and the catatonic Audra. Mike is seen recovering in the hospital, and as the losers go their separate ways once again, the memories of it begin to fade with time. And in case you're wondering what happens to Audra, well, of course, she recovers and comes back to her normal self. It 2017. The year is 1988, and it's a particularly rainy day in October. Bill Denbrough is seen making a paper sailboat for his brother Georgie. Bill is too sick to join his brother outside in the pouring rain and watches his excited brother running out to play. Georgie sails his boat along the rainy streets of Derry, and he enjoys running after it, but after a while, the boat falls down a storm drain. As he tries to get his boat back, he finds a clown in the drain who introduces himself as Pennywise the Dancing Clown. Pennywise engages in playful banter with Georgie before offering his boat back. As Georgie comes closer to take the boat, Pennywise grabs hold of Georgie's arm and bites it off, after which he drags Georgie down into the sewers with him. The following summer, in June next year, we're introduced to Bill and his friends Eddie, Richie, and Stan. It's the last day of school, and the boys are pretty excited to start their summer. Unfortunately, they become targets of their school's psychopathic bully, Henry Bowers, and his posse. Things get even more heated between the two groups when the new kid in town, Ben Haskam, Beverly Marsh, and orphan Mike Hanlon join Bill and his friends. Mind you, both Bill and Ben develop feelings for her after Beverly joins the group. It's also around the same time that we, as the audience, learn that Bill is still hopeful about finding his missing brother, unlike his parents, who've accepted his death. As a result, he's seen searching every possible place where he believes Georgie's body may have washed up. Moving on with the storyline, after Ben shares with the group his research on the unexplained tragedies and child disappearances that have been occurring in Derry for centuries, each of them begins to have terrifying encounters with Pennywise, especially with the latter shapeshifting into their worst fears. For instance, Stan finds a disturbing painting of a woman coming alive while studying for his bar mitzvah. Ben is chased by a headless boy at the library. Eddie's attacked by a highly infected leper who seems to be at an incurable stage. Beverly hears voices coming from her bathroom sink that ends up spewing blood that's only visible to children. Bill sees a decomposed version of Georgie, and as for Mike, he relives the moment his house was burnt down and his parents died inside. While Richie seems to be the only one who has not been haunted, he confesses of being absolutely petrified of clowns. Calling themselves the Losers Club, the group realizes that the same being is stalking all of them, one that knows exactly what scares them the most, and they decide to refer to the entity as It. Further research helps the group learn that it awakens every 27 years to feed on the children of Derry and then go back to hibernation. Somehow, the group is also able to link that all the places where the tragedies have taken place are in a way connected by the sewers, and the sewers ultimately meet up at the old stone well, which is hidden underneath the abandoned house on Nabalt Street. Eddie's on the verge of having an asthma attack when it ends up briefly attacking the whole group. Afterward, the group goes to the abandoned house to confront it, only to get separated and terrorized. With Beverly managing to drive a spear through its head, it is left with no choice but to retreat. After Bill gets into a fight with Richie over being persistent in going after it and finding the whole pursuit of Georgie life-threatening, the group splits up. As the losers individually carry on going about with their lives, Henry ends up murdering his abusive father after it leads him the way to commit the act. Beverly, on the other hand, gets abducted by it after she rightfully deals with her sexually abusive father. With Bill realizing Beverly's life is in danger, he reassembles the losers and all of them arrive at the abandoned house to save her. The losers find the well where it dwells, and one by one, they start to head down. Before Mike can climb the rope, Henry shows up and attacks Mike with a nail gun. However, Mike fights back and pushes Henry down the well, where he falls to his death. As the losers descend into the sewers, they finally find its underground lair, which is more like a mountain of old and decayed circus props and an array of children's belongings, around which the bodies of the missing kids are seen floating mid-air. Beverly is also one of them, rendered catatonic after being exposed to the deadlights inside its mouth. She's pulled out of her trance after Ben kisses her and realizes that Ben wrote the poem on the postcard she had anonymously received earlier. While the group is seen hugging, Bill finds Georgie there and admits for the first time that his brother is really dead. And this whole time, it was it who was playing tricks with him. This naturally has it taking Bill as a hostage and offering the chance to spare the lives of the others if they leave Bill behind. Bill urges his friends to go and apologizes to them for having dragged them into all of this in the first place. However, the losers are now hell-bent on taking back their friend and also killing it. Overcoming their fears, each of them hits it to the point that he's completely powerless, unable to hurt any of them because nobody is afraid of him anymore. It is left with no other choice but to retreat deeper into the sewers before Bill can deliver the final blow. As the floating kids begin to descend down, Bill finds Georgie's yellow raincoat amongst a pile of the kids' belongings and finally accepts his brother's death. Sometime later, Beverly tells the group about the vision she had while she was catatonic. She saw all of them fighting it as adults. This has the losers making a blood pact that they will return to Derry as adults if it comes back. The film ends with the losers bidding each other goodbye and Bill revealing his feelings to Beverly by kissing her. It Chapter 2. Sometimes, what you wish is forgotten. What you try to leave in the past will not stay there. Instead, it will come back to haunt you. Well, 27 years later, after its defeat at the hands of the losers, it resurfaces once again in Derry, brutally killing a man named Adrian Mellon after he and his boyfriend were viciously assaulted by a bunch of homophobic teens. It also leaves behind a special message, especially for the losers, prompting Mike, the only member of the Losers Club who had stayed behind in Derry, to call the others and fulfill their blood oath. The rest of the losers had left Derry a long time back, pretty much having forgotten their childhood memories, and in turn had flourished in life. Bill is a successful author and screenwriter who's married to an actress. Eddie is a risk analyst, but married to someone who is just as controlling as his mother was. Ben is an architect who's not only lost his weight tremendously, but he's also become pretty hot. Richie's become a stand-up comedian. Stanley works in partnership with an accounting firm. And Beverly is an established fashion designer, married to an abusive husband. When Mike calls up his old friends, they initially don't remember him, but he nonetheless reminds them of their oath and urges them all to return to Derry immediately. Of course, Stanley doesn't make it, and he ends up committing suicide, which the rest don't come to know about until they make it to Derry. While Mike does his best to refresh the old memories, it breaks up the reunion, disclosing to the group about Stanley's death in the ghastliest manner possible. Of course, the news had everybody shaken. Richie and Eddie decide to leave Derry that night. Ben and Beverly come back to the hotel where all of them are staying and pour a drink. When Ben urges her to tell him what's bothering her, she initially doesn't say anything. But when Ben confronts her, saying that she somehow knew how Stanley died even before the news was confirmed by Stanley's wife, Beverly admits to Ben, Richie, and Eddie that she has seen all of them die in her vision if they don't complete their blood oath to kill it. In the meantime, it continues the killing cycle by brutally taking the life of a little girl named Victoria at a baseball match. That's not all. It also helps Henry Bowers, who was arrested 27 years ago for the murder of his father, escape from the mental asylum he was confined to. As for Bill, he's persuaded by Mike to go back to his loft, which is in the town library, to give him one last chance to show him something. Bill agrees, and Mike brings him to his place. There, he spikes the water and offers it to Bill to show him a drug-induced vision from which Bill learns about the origin of it and how Mike has learnt from a Native American tribe about the Ritual of Chüd, which can supposedly destroy it once and for all. Mike and Bill go back to the other losers. Mike explains to the group that it got to Stanley because he was the weakest amongst all, and if they didn't stop it, they will all be meeting similar fates. With Eddie asking Mike how they're supposed to stop it, Mike tells them about the tribal ritual, and it finally dawns upon the rest of the losers that if they do not beat it in this cycle, they will all die. Mike decides to help his friends remember certain incidents from the past, and takes them all across town to help them recall things from the past. They stop at their old clubhouse, one that Ben had built for them over the summer. The group recovers a shower cap of Stanley from there and plans to use it as an artifact on Stanley's behalf. Mike tells the group that there's a lot more to their story, things that they still cannot remember, so the plan is to dig into the past. Each of them is supposed to find a certain artifact from their childhood all by themselves in order to make the ritual work. Beverly arrives at her childhood home to learn from the new occupant, who is an old lady, that her father had passed away. She manages to retrieve Ben's poem before getting attacked by the elderly woman, now in a grotesque, monstrous form. Of course, she happens to be none other than it in disguise, and while Beverly manages to get away from there, it appears in his human form, Bob Gray, and taunts her while putting on the clown makeup and scratching red lines on his face. Richie goes to an old arcade that he used to visit regularly as a kid and picks up an old game token as his artifact. Inside, he recalls an embarrassing incident after which he was also attacked by a giant Paul Bunyan statue. No wonder it appears in front of the adult Richie and confronts him on his hidden homosexuality before the latter runs away from there. As for Bill, he ends up purchasing his old bike from an antique shop and rides around the town. As he passes the storm drain where Georgie was abducted, he almost falls into the trap laid out by it, but recovers the paper sailboat from there, the one that he had made for his brother that fateful day. Bill finds a young boy named Dean, whom he had earlier met at the restaurant where the losers had their reunion. Upon hearing from Dean that he hears voices too from the drain, Bill warns Dean to get out of Derry with his parents and never come back there. Ben arrives at the town's high school, and upon finding his old yearbook, rips out the page that was signed by Beverly and chooses to use that as his artifact, but not before briefly recalling a dreadful incident where it had taken the form of a demonic Beverly who had her head up in flames. Eddie, on the other hand, goes to a pharmacy to pick up his inhaler, but ends up remembering a childhood incident where he found his mother getting attacked by the same rotting leper in the basement. The adult Eddie encounters the leper again, but he manages to incapacitate it until the latter ends up vomiting on him. This drives Eddie mad, and he runs screaming out of the pharmacy. The losers arrive at the hotel, and Bill finds a message for him from it and realizes that its next target is Dean. Remembering that Dean will be at the carnival, he leaves immediately in the hopes of rescuing him. As for Richie, he discreetly leaves the hotel, determined to leave Derry regardless of the visions. Eddie, on the other hand, is seen washing himself thoroughly when he gets stabbed in the cheek by Henry. While Eddie is able to remove the knife, he stabs Henry with it and calls for help. However, before Ben can catch hold of Henry, he jumps out of the bathroom window. By then, Bill has also arrived at the carnival, and he keeps looking for Dean. After spotting him entering the Hall of Mirrors, he follows him, only to find it gruesomely devouring Dean right in front of Bill, much to his horror. Moving on, we find Richie very close to leaving town, only to change his mind at the last minute when he remembers attending Stanley's bar mitzvah and, more importantly, the empowering speech that he had given that day. Richie makes his way straight to the library and stops Henry from killing Mike by stabbing him in the back of his head and thereby killing him. The losers figure out that Bill will be at the Neibolt house and rush there to convince an utterly distraught Bill not to face it all by himself. As the losers step inside the abandoned house, they are split up by it, who ends up taking the form of a young Stanley's disembodied, decaying head. After the group is done dealing with its threat, they realize that it simply wants them to be scared, and under no condition can they allow that to happen again. They arrive at the cavern beneath the sewers where the fight took place 27 years ago and make their way into a chasm, which has been its hiding place for millions of years. As the losers prep themselves up for the ritual, Mike informs them that it can only be attacked in its true form and takes out the ancient ritualistic pottery that he had managed to lay his hands on from the Native Americans. He lights it up and asks everyone to hand out their respective artifacts and throw them inside. As they grab each other's hands, the Deadlights appear above them and enter the pottery. Just when it seems that the ritual has worked, a red balloon emerges out of the pottery, growing colossal in size, and when it pops, it appears in the form of an enormous, monstrous Pennywise spider hybrid and forces Mike into admitting that the ritual had taken the lives of the original native performers. As Mike resigns himself to his fate, it attacks him, but Bill leaps at Mike, causing it to miss his target. It angrily goes after the losers and places them into nightmarish scenarios. Ben is compelled to face the fact that he only pretended to be sick the day Georgie died, unintentionally causing his death. Beverly is locked inside a bathroom stall, which begins to get filled with blood, and Ben finds himself being buried alive in the clubhouse. While Bill is ultimately able to beat his nightmarish situation by not holding himself responsible for his brother's death, Beverly also comes to the realization that it was Ben and not Bill who had written the poem to her years ago. It's fitting to state that the trio is able to break out of their respective nightmares. As we move on with the storyline, it ends up finding out Mike's hidden spot, and as it attempts to devour him, Richie hurls a rock at it and saves Mike. With Richie further insulting it, he gets hit by the Deadlights. As he begins to float, his eyes roll back into his head. Witnessing Richie in that state, Eddie overcomes his fears and drives a spear right into its mouth. While this saves Richie, Eddie gets fatally impaled by it in the process. A dying Eddie explains to his friends how he had earlier made it feel smaller when he had almost choked the leper at the pharmacy to death. This has the losers overcoming their fears and confronting it like they are no longer afraid. With it addressing himself as the Eater of Worlds, Mike tells it that he isn't what he thinks, not at least to the losers. With Mike further calling it a mere clown, Beverly steps in and addresses it as a weak old woman. Ben calls it a headless boy, and Bill screams at it, calling him an imposter. With the losers constantly hurling insults at it, it physically begins to shrink in size, growing weaker too in the process. With Mike taking out its scared, beating heart, the losers crush it together, using just their hands, finally killing it. By the time they return to Eddie, he has already succumbed to his injuries. The losers are forced to leave Eddie's body behind as the lair starts to crumble and everything collapses around them. The Neibolt house collapses too, right after they manage to get themselves out of the house. Later, at the waterlogged quarry, the losers are seen comforting Richie, after which Ben and Beverly kiss. When the scars on their palms disappear, Mike comments, "Nothing lasts forever." Sometime later, Bill begins writing a new story when Mike rings him up and informs him about a letter. The letter is from Stanley, who had written one for each of the losers before his death, explaining why he did what he had to do. Stanley was way too scared to face it, and his death in a way acted like a catalyst that led to the losers reuniting and taking it down together like they were meant to. With Stanley's letter telling the losers to live their life to the fullest, we as the viewers find Mike finally moving out of Derry, and Ben and Beverly in a romantic relationship with each other. As for Richie, he returns to the kissing bridge where he had once carved his and Eddie's initials. It, Welcome to Derry. Well, we have good news for every fan of the It franchise because mark our words when we say that you will be getting another chance to be scared out of your wits as Pennywise the Dancing Clown is all set to come back in the prequel series titled It, Welcome to Derry. Developed by the celebrated trio of Andy and Barbara Muschietti and Jason Fuchs, this upcoming supernatural horror TV series is gearing up for a grand release this year on HBO. The series promises to explore the past of the creature in a manner never seen before. So that means not only will the TV show take a dive into the ancient past of Pennywise, but the series will also showcase the darker aspects of Derry's history, which were irrefutably influenced by the predatory monster. While it is true that we still don't have a trailer at our disposal, there is plenty of information to get you all psyched up. The most important thing to understand right now about the show is that Welcome to Derry takes place years before the Losers Club became aware of it. It was disclosed in January that the series will feature 3 seasons, with the first set in 1962, the second in 1935, and the third in 1908. What's certainly fascinating is that unlike most horror shows, the timeline here moves backwards, which means there's a high possibility that every season will create situations that will most likely be explained in the following seasons. While Andy Muschietti has been roped in to direct several episodes of the first season, which also includes the pilot, Fuchs will serve as the writer. Now, when it comes to the cast, most of them are newcomers to the franchise. The main cast consists of Jovan Adepo, Taylor Page, Chris Chalk, Stephen Ryder, James Remar, and dare we disregard Bill Skarsgård. Of course, Bill is back to reprising his role as the eponymous It. That being said, plenty of new child actors have also been hired to essay the role of It's victims. In terms of the storyline, we don't yet have anything solid at the moment, but what's been reportedly confirmed is that the first season will go back to the history of one of Derry's most infamous locations, the Black Spot. While we wait with bated breath for new information, fans can rest assured that the series is at least in good hands. Marvelous verdict. Well, that's all for today, and with this, we finally come to the end of our video here. So, how did you find the entire lore of It? What's your favorite part about this extra-dimensional entity? Are you a fan of the 1990 TV series or Muschietti's flicks? We'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Now, if you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Please do leave a thumbs up and stay tuned with us, as we promise to come back with more exciting content. Till then, goodbye, and thanks for watching. Have a nice one.